Good evening, I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Trump and Putin agree to meet in the next coming days. Protesters in Israel march through Tel Aviv demanding return of hostages. And the president of Azerbaijan flies to Washington, D.C. for a working visit. US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin have agreed to meet in the coming days, the Kremlin has said. The announcement follows US envoy Steve Witkoff's talks with Putin on Wednesday. It has been suggested that the meeting could take place in the UAE. It will be the first US-Russia leadership summit since former President Joe Biden met with his counterpart in Geneva in June 2021.
Talks to stop the war in Ukraine between US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian President Vladimir Putin were good, according to US President Donald Trump on Wednesday. And now, Trump says there's a good chance he will meet the Russian leader soon, possibly as soon as next week. However, he gave no indication where the meeting might take place.
We haven't determined where, but we had some very good talks with President Putin today, and there's a very good chance that we could be ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
President Trump also discussed a potential summit when he called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. According to a senior source in Kyiv, the high-level meeting will include European leaders too.
European leaders were also on the call. I am grateful to each of them for their support. We discussed what was said in Moscow. It appears that Russia is now more inclined to consider a ceasefire. The pressure on them is working. But the main thing is to make sure they don't deceive anyone in the details, neither us nor the United States.
However, despite the talks, heavy fighting continues across multiple fronts in Ukraine. Russia claimed on Wednesday that its forces had launched coordinated strikes on several Ukrainian targets, including natural gas transmission systems. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, troops advanced deeper into Ukrainian defensive lines, clashing with Ukrainian forces and destroying tanks and drone warehouses. The ministry also reported that 51 Ukrainian drones were intercepted and shot down over regions including Rostov and Bryansk Oblasts in Russia. Meanwhile, Ukraine's armed forces reported 143 combat clashes in frontline areas. Ukrainian troops struck Russian command posts and artillery systems, signaling continued resistance despite diplomatic activity behind the scenes. Tensions also escalated near the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. No casualties were reported, and radiation levels reportedly remain within normal limits. The plant's administration condemned the attack, while Ukraine has yet to comment on the allegations. The ongoing military operations comes as President Trump's deadline for deciding on fresh sanctions against Russia looms, unless a ceasefire is agreed.
To discuss this further, I am now joined by Daniela Mello, a political scientist at Boston University. Good evening.
Good evening, Nadia.
My first question is, things have moved on pretty quickly. What can we expect from the meeting with Putin and Trump?
Well, that's a wonderful question because it's an unknown. What one hopes would come out of a summit is a concrete plan, perhaps even a roadmap for peace, long-lasting peace in Ukraine. Right now, there doesn't seem to be any true indication that such is what will occur. And in fact, most indications seem to be that we may have a repeat of the type of summit that President Trump held in 2018 in Helsinki with Mr. Putin, in which not a great deal of advances were made. Having said that, again, every time that leaders meet, this is an opportunity for there to be conversations, dialogue, step forth. And if there's one difference here, it's certainly the apparent willingness of the United States to not completely exclude Mr. Zelensky and the European allies from these conversations. That being the case, and if that materializes, that would definitely be a step forward in this process. At the same time, the most likely scenario, certainly according to many other analysts, but given the pattern that we have seen, the pattern of interaction between Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump, the most likely situation that we have here is a diplomatic attempt, a diplomatic maneuver by President Putin to try to win some time and to a certain extent, to appease Mr. Trump ahead of this, or moving towards this deadline for sanctions. So even though the President of the United States has made many even incendiary accusations towards Mr. Putin over the past few weeks, calling him crazy, for instance, one that's coming to mind, it has been mostly bluster. We have seen actually very little direct pressure on Russia beyond just a battle of words. And if this deadline came along with no action, Mr. Putin, I think rightfully would understand that that would put the United States in a position to actually have to do something. For instance, the imposition of tariffs in India is perhaps the most indirect such pressure that we would have on Mr. Putin so far, but the idea that, the Americans could place additional sanctions just like the Europeans did a few weeks ago. So Mr. Putin is clearly trying to avoid this, and he has taken the lead, some would say, in trying to set up this summit meeting. Again, the most likely or the best scenario for Mr. Putin right here is that he is trying to basically reset the relationship with Mr. Trump back to February. To a place where Mr. Trump was willing to accept that Russia would take the lead in setting the terms of a potential ceasefire or ending of conflict in Ukraine, that this would be negotiated directly between Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump, and that Kyiv would be forced to or compelled to accept whatever the two powers decided for its future. If that's the case, that would definitely be a retrocess from the point of view of the Europeans and of the Ukrainians. But certainly that seems to be the strategy that Mr. Putin is planning for here, to be able to reset the relationship with the United States and get the United States back into a position where it's dialoguing with Russia while excluding Mr. Zelensky and the Europeans.
You mentioned that Putin is trying to appease Trump in some way. So my question is, how significant is the meeting? That are we going to get closer to a peace deal with the war in Ukraine, or is this just a tactic by Putin to kind of just play along to Trump's demands?
This circles back to some of what I was saying, in the sense that, in short, if there's an actual dialogue that involves the Europeans and involves Mr. Zelensky, then that could be quite significant. However, if we are just seeing a bilateral meeting between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin, then it's more likely that the scenario is one in which Russia is trying to gain time, gain concessions, and try to show, this. Let me give a specific example. For instance, there's been talk of Russia being willing to negotiate for an air truce, a moratorium on the use of missiles and drones. And if this was, in fact, the outcome of such a negotiation, that would clearly put Ukraine at a disadvantage. I mean, the air is exactly where Ukraine has some advantage in this war because it doesn't have as many soldiers and it relies on the West for most of its weapons. So an air truce would appear to be a win for Mr. Trump because something would come out, some sort of a partial ceasefire, but in practice, it would be a loss for the Ukrainians. So it's very clear that Mr. Putin is playing diplomatic chess here that allows him to position himself in a more favorable position with the United States without ceding any terrain for peace in Ukraine.
I see. And the fact that apparently it's been suggested that the talks could actually happen in the UAE, is that a good location for both leaders to come together, and actually have a meeting about all that's going on?
Well, it's an interesting location for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's a safe location for Mr. Putin. As we know, the UAE is not a signatory to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, so Mr. Putin could hold the summit without fear of being apprehended. The UAE has also made a lot of diplomatic efforts to be on friendly terms with the United States government, and has achieved that. So there's good communication between the leaders of the UAE and the United States. And finally, they have already placed themselves as a mediator in this particular conflict between the different parties. We should recall that the UAE, for instance, has been the mediator in hostage swaps between the Ukrainians and the Russians. So in some sense, it makes sense that the UAE, for these players, would be a good host.
Thank you so much for joining me, Daniela Mello. Thank you.
Thank you.
More tariffs and more tension. President Donald Trump has triggered a sweeping new round of import duties, hitting 69 countries and escalating pressure on major economies. With 100% tariffs on foreign semiconductors and fresh penalties on India, analysts warn the move could trigger a global supply chain shakeup and trade war escalation.
More US tariffs are being launched, and the impact could reshape supply chains worldwide, according to analysts. Beginning on Thursday, reciprocal import duties ranging from 10% to 41% will hit exports from 69 countries. The move comes as President Donald Trump invokes emergency economic powers to justify what he calls a necessary realignment of global trade. Notably, goods from all non-listed countries will face a 10% tariff, though that rate could rise. And that's not all. In a major escalation, Trump announced a 100% tariff on all imported semiconductor chips, unless companies are building or planning to build factories in the United States.
So in other words, we'll be putting a tariff on of approximately 100% on chips and semiconductors. But if you're building in the United States of America, there's no charge, even though you're building and you're not producing yet in terms of the big numbers of jobs and all of the things that you're building. If you're building, there will be no charge. So I just want everyone to know that. And I didn't even tell you that inside. We discussed the concept, but I didn't. So it's a big factor. So 100% tariff on all chips and semiconductors coming into the United States. But if you've made a commitment to build, or if you're in the process of building, as many are, there is no tariff.
The surprise announcement comes as the president imposed an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods, citing New Delhi's continued purchases of Russian oil. Trump also hinted China could be next, warning of potential tariffs and secondary sanctions if Beijing continues energy trade with Moscow. Financial markets are reacting cautiously. Asian equities opened mixed on Thursday, with Tokyo and Seoul markets climbing back after early losses. Taiwan's tech-heavy index jumped more than 2% amid hopes its domestic chip maker, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, may be spared. But as President Trump threatens more tariffs, including on pharmaceuticals and Chinese imports, industry leaders are warning of catastrophic consequences, especially for sectors with limited export alternatives.
Dozens of hostage families marched through Tel Aviv demanding a deal to bring their loved ones home. Pressure grows while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu plans to seize Gaza.
Hostage families took to the streets of Tel Aviv on Wednesday, demanding an immediate deal to bring the remaining captives home from Gaza. Some demonstrators attempted to push through the gates of the military headquarters before being stopped by police. There are still 50 hostages believed to be held by Hamas, with at least 20 thought to be alive. Public pressure has intensified after the recent release of disturbing videos showing two extremely emaciated captives.
We need your help to make this decision be made right now. We need your help that this time all 50 hostages will be released, because a month later, just a year ago, my family member was executed by Hamas terrorists. She did nothing wrong. She had dreams to fulfill. She had a family who's mourning. Evyatar's family, Rom's family, can still get Evyatar and Rom back.
We're especially desperate at the moment. Tomorrow the cabinet is meeting, not to discuss how quickly they can return our hostages, not to discuss how dire is their situation after we've seen them starved and skeletal, but rather to discuss the Prime Minister's plan to occupy Gaza even further and to continue with the war.
Efforts to broker a ceasefire in Qatar collapsed last month. Hamas is demanding a permanent end to the war as part of any deal. Israel, meanwhile, accuses the group of trying to hold on to power and says its military campaign must continue. After meeting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday, opposition leader Yair Lapid said he had urged Netanyahu to reconsider, warning that public support for the war was fading and that a full military takeover would be a serious mistake.
France is battling its biggest wildfire in nearly 8 decades for a second day, with flames spreading across an area larger than Paris. One person has died and thousands have been forced to evacuate as firefighters race to contain the blaze.
France is confronting its most severe wildfire in almost 80 years, as flames in the southern Aude region have already scorched more than 16,000 hectares, an area larger than the entire city of Paris. Officials confirmed the death of a 65-year-old woman in her home in Saint-Laurent-de-la-Cabrèris. 13 others have been injured, including 9 firefighters, and at least 3 people are missing. The fire broke out Tuesday afternoon and spread rapidly through forests and villages. At least 25 homes have been destroyed and more than 15 settlements affected. Thousands of residents and tourists have evacuated to safer areas as the fire continues to burn out of control.
I was a little bit sad, and then I looked around. Some houses were completely destroyed, whereas mine has some damage, but it can be fixed. But for some people, it's definitely over. Their houses are totally destroyed. I have a neighbor down here, and for her it's even more dramatic, as she was in a house. So we're trying to keep things in perspective.
More than 2,500 homes have lost power, and multiple roads remain closed. Around 2,100 firefighters, supported by 90 aircraft and army helicopters, are now on the ground, but conditions remain critical. Winds are reaching 40 kilometers an hour, and the vegetation is very dry, which is feeding the flames. Authorities warn the next hours will be decisive. Prime Minister François Bayrou described the fire as a catastrophe of unprecedented scale, and said climate change and prolonged drought were driving the crisis.
South Korea and the US will begin their annual Ulchi Freedom Shield military drills on the 18th of August. The 11-day exercise has been partially rescheduled, with half of the events moved to September due to extreme weather. Officials say the drills will focus on upgraded responses to North Korea's nuclear threats and modern warfare scenarios. The exercise will stimulate a North Korean missile launch, but not a nuclear test. North Korea has criticized the drills as a provocation. Cambodia and Thailand's top defence officials agreed to let ASEAN observers inspect the disputed border areas on Thursday. This is to help ensure that fighting does not start again after a 5-day conflict that ended with at least 43 deaths and a temporary ceasefire in late July. The leaders only agreed to negotiate after US President Donald Trump warned that tariff talks would be paused unless a peace deal was restored. On Thursday, Cambodian Defence Minister and Thailand's Acting Defence Minister met in Kuala Lumpur to discuss a permanent ceasefire. The two countries have long disputed parts of their 817-kilometre land border, which was originally mapped out by France in 1907 during its colonial rule. President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, has arrived in Washington, D.C. for a working visit at the invitation of President Donald Trump. President Aliyev was welcomed by officials at Joint Base Andrews military facility. US President Donald Trump is scheduled to hold separate meetings on Friday in Washington with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, according to his official agenda. The Armenian Prime Minister's office has confirmed that Pashinyan will be in the US on Thursday and Friday. The discussions are aimed at promoting peace, prosperity, and enhanced economic cooperation in the region. The three leaders are expected to make a joint announcement, according to the US administration. And I'm now joined live by Hamdi Rafay, Government Relations Executive Director for MOS Strategies and Foreign Affairs Analyst. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on.
My first question is, it's all been confirmed that President Aliyev has flown to Washington. So what can we expect from the talks coming?
So there are several agreements that are going to be signed tomorrow. We don't know the exact details, but what we understand is that there will be an agreement to end their participation in the Minsk group by both Armenia and Azerbaijan. There will be an agreement to execute peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There will be memorandums of understanding to further the discussions to reach a final peace agreement, executing what is understood to be happening today. And then, of course, there is an agreement between Armenia and the United States for what's called TRIP, which is Trump's path to peace, which would provide a corridor, and they're not using the language of a corridor, but a route that the US would secure for commercial purposes only for Armenia to pass from Armenia proper to Nakhchivan.
I see. So that's quite a few things happening. And how significant is this meeting going to be for both countries, including the US?
This is the most significant development since the 40-day war. And I don't think anyone can underestimate what will happen here. What is occurring is the US is coming into the Caucasus playing a role that Russia had played in the past as a guarantor of transport, of peace, as a middleman between Azerbaijan and Armenia in a way that Russia was never able to perform successfully before. We've seen a great increase in trade already between Azerbaijan and Armenia. We expect that the bilateral relations between Azerbaijan and the United States will only grow stronger as a result of this. Clearly, we see that, Trump has an interest here in furthering these relationships the relationship with Azerbaijan, because he wants to expand the Abraham Accords. Whether that's relevant here to include Azerbaijan or not in it is a whole different issue. Obviously, Azerbaijan already has very good relations with Israel, and they're not at war, so I'm not quite sure how that would develop, but Trump sees that as a possibility here. And so the relationship between America and the US is coming together, cementing future development, future growth in trade in a way that we've never seen before. Finally, the United States has switched from using the stick approach with Azerbaijan to using a purely carrot approach of incentives to grow that bilateral relationship for the mutual benefit of both Azerbaijan and America. Certainly, for the first time, we're seeing a real agreement between Armenia and the United States. Armenia has typically been a protectorate of Russia, this agreement would bring Armenia more into the Western camp. And as a result, we would see a great amount of economic growth opportunities for Armenia and for Armenia with Azerbaijan. So everyone gains to benefit tremendously here.
And yeah, as you mentioned, the trip in regards to Trump's pathway, why is that significant in regards to a third-party actor in this? Would that help both sides in regards to boosting economy during that pathway or corridor, as it was formerly known?
Well, it creates a route all the way from the Caspian Sea into Turkey. So now a whole new transportation route is created. And I mean, Azerbaijan has been separated from its mainland Armenia by road transport. So certainly the opportunities here are enormous. In addition to which, once there's a peace agreement, then there can be growth and normalization between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Definitely, and these peace talks, obviously this is like a second round because Armenia and Azerbaijan met in Abu Dhabi last month. How much progress is now being made now they're going to Washington, D.C. to meet with Trump?
Well, the developments that we're seeing today really started with Trump taking office. We've seen that there's a completely different approach that was essentially initiated by Steve Witkoff over the past 4, 5, 6 months, where he's gone to Azerbaijan and Armenia to meet with the respective parties. There have been meetings between the foreign ministers, and this has developed over that time period. And of course, there have been rumors of this, that, and other thing over the past several weeks. But now we know that really what's coming of this is a big win for the United States, because as most people seem to think that the United States is withdrawn from the world, what this really shows is that America is taking a larger role in the world to bring peace.
Yes, and it's something that's definitely on Donald Trump's agenda. So he's definitely going to see this as a win for his administration. Is that likely?
It's already a win. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Trump's unorthodox approach to bringing peace is really clearly bringing results. Most people belittle how he does things. They say he's transactional. They say that he has no experience, that Steve Witkoff is just a real estate developer, just like Donald Trump is. But the fact here is that going outside of that box of the norms of diplomacy to do things in this business way, looking at it as a real estate deal, has paid off enormous returns for Donald Trump, the United States, and the Caucasus.
Thank you so much for joining me this evening, Hamdi Rifai. Thank you.
Thank you.
On Thursday, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, met with US President Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Washington during his working visit to the US. A memorandum of cooperation was signed between Azerbaijan state oil company Socar and ExxonMobil with the participation of President Aliyev and Steve Witkoff. The document was signed by the Minister of Economy of Azerbaijan, Mikhail Jabarov, and Vice President of ExxonMobil, John Ardil. After that, President Ilham Aliyev met with the US President's Special Envoy. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says a new framework is needed with the UN nuclear watchdog, accusing it of failing to condemn attacks on Iranian nuclear sites. Meanwhile, Egypt appears to be stepping up mediation efforts and warming ties with Tehran. Our reporter has more.
Foreign Minister Araghchi said Iran's relations with the UN nuclear watchdog require a new framework because the agency failed to condemn the Israel-US aggression on Iran's civilian nuclear sites under its safeguards. Speaking on the IRIB TV, he also criticized the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi for what he described as a false report in June, which led to adoption of a resolution on Iran's non-compliance and also served as a pretext for Israel and US to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. Araghchi said several of our nuclear facilities were bombed and have suffered damage. It is natural that because of these developments and because of the parliamentary law on suspension of cooperation with the IAEA, a new chapter must begin in relations with the agency. He added that the IAEA Deputy Director General will be visiting Iran in coming days for this purpose only, and that there will be no inspections during the visit. Meanwhile, Egypt announced that its Foreign Minister Badr Abdel-Ati has held telephone talks with Araghchi and Grossi on the issue of Iran's nuclear program and its strained relations with the IAEA. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry said in a statement that during the contact with his Iranian counterpart, Abdel-Ati emphasized the importance of adhering to diplomatic channels and laying the framework for resumption of cooperation with the IAEA. Recent positive developments in Tehran-Cairo relations, frequent meetings and repeated telephone calls between Iranian and Egyptian foreign ministers hint at Egypt's mediatory role in bringing Iran and IAEA back to normal ties. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi confirmed in the interview on state TV that relations with Egypt are advancing beyond expectation. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
Deputy Prime Minister of Kazakhstan, Kanat Bazarbayev, has commented on the progress of the investigation into the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crash near Kazakhstan's Oktau city. He said that the Ministry of Transport is working intensively and liaising with international experts from different countries. The Deputy Prime Minister noted that the key question remains how the aircraft was damaged. Investigators have reached out to several countries for information on weapons that use similar striking elements found in the fuselage. The investigation is expected to be completed by the end of the year to determine the true cause of the crash. A high-level meeting was held in Kabul between Afghanistan's Deputy Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff for the International Organization for Migration. The meeting focused on expanding humanitarian cooperation and increasing support for a growing number of Afghan refugees returning from neighboring countries. Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
Deputy Prime Minister for Administrative Affairs Abdusalam Hanafi met with Muhammad Ibtikar, the Chief of Staff at the International Organization for Migration. The two discussed expanding cooperation to support the rising number of Afghan refugees returning home, many under difficult circumstances. The IOM reaffirmed its readiness to work closely with Kabul to ensure the needs of returnees are met with dignity and compassion. Both sides emphasized the need for a long-term framework and stronger international coordination. According to the UNHCR, more than 2.1 million Afghans have returned from Iran and Pakistan since the start of 2025, many forcibly. From April to the end of July alone, 1.4 million returned from Iran and over 300,000 from Pakistan. The refugee situation is set to intensify. Pakistan has now given a deadline. All registered Afghan refugees must leave the country by the end of August. The UNHCR issued refugee cards expired at the end of June, affecting an estimated 1.5 million people. Returnees from Iran have reported cases of harassment, wage loss and discrimination, according to the UNHCR, raising concerns about their reintegration and safety in Afghanistan. With growing pressure on Afghanistan's fragile infrastructure and resources, calls for urgent international support are growing louder. As the deadline looms, and the numbers climb. Afghan officials and global partners face a race against time to prepare. Tamim Bahis reporting for A News from Kabul, Afghanistan.
Foreign Minister of Turkey Hakan Fidan visited Syria on Thursday and met with President Ahmed al-Sharaa and Foreign Minister Assad al-Shabani. The visit focused on boosting ties and cooperation 8 months after the fall of the Assad regime. Both sides discussed strengthening collaboration across various fields and sources. Priority for Turkey is to seize these opportunities in line with the shared interests of both countries and in a way that supports Syria's stability and security. Turkey has reaffirmed its support for Syria's stability and pledged continued high-level engagement. Turkey and Syria have signed a landmark agreement to establish a joint business council aiming to restore institutional ties after years of fractured relations.
Turkey and Syria have signed a landmark agreement to establish a joint business council aiming to restore institutional ties after years of fractured relations. The memorandum of understanding was signed on Wednesday during a roundtable in Ankara chaired by Syrian Economy and Industry Minister Nidal Al-Shar and Turkey's Deputy Trade Minister Özgür Volkan Ağar, with participation from business leaders under the Foreign Economic Relations Board. The talks focused heavily on opportunities in Syria's post-war reconstruction, with special emphasis on build, operate, transfer, and public-private partnership models that could follow Turkish firms to play a leading role in rebuilding critical infrastructure. In total, 9 additional Memorandum of Understanding agreements were signed between Turkish and Syrian civil society organizations, laying the groundwork for long-term cooperation across trade, investment, and industry. Turkey's trade ministry calls for the reopening of the communication channels between the private sectors and deepening economic ties in a structured, sustainable way. While diplomatic relations between Ankara and Damascus remain sensitive, this economic step marks a strategic re-engagement with the potential to grow if stability and trust can be built over time. For A News, this is Aliyev Aziz, Istanbul, Turkey.
Caspian countries are joining efforts to save the Caspian Sea at a meeting Awaza held during the UN conference in landlocked developed countries. Deputy Prime Ministers from the 5 coastal states voiced concern about the changes in the sea's ecosystem. They warn that falling water levels are affecting the social and economic life of coastal areas and called for urgent and coordinated action. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimazina reports from Oktay, where the impact and the crisis is clearly visible.
Kazakhstan has the longest stretch of Caspian coastline, almost a third of the entire shore. We are in Aktau, the regional capital of Mangistau, where the scale of the sea's retreat is hard to ignore. Huge areas that were once underwater are now completely dry. And according to the National Hydrometeorology Service, the Caspian's current water level is minus 29 meters, based on the Baltic Height system. The shallow northern part of the sea, shared by Kazakhstan and Russia, is suffering the most. A drop like this has not been seen since 1977. And in the last 15 years, the water surface in Kazakhstan's part of the Caspian has shrunk by more than 7%. Marine life is also at risk. Sturgeon numbers have plummeted by 90% over the past 40 years. The causes are complex, but scientists point to several key drivers: rising greenhouse gas emissions, higher air temperatures, and faster water loss from both the sea itself and the rivers that flow into it. This is made worse by increasing demand for water in farming, industry, and city infrastructure, which puts even more pressure on river systems. About 130 rivers flow into the Caspian, but the Volga plays the biggest role. It provides over 80% of the sea's annual inflow, around 270 to 300 billion cubic meters of water. But decades of industrial development and water infrastructure projects along the Volga may have reduced the amount of water that actually reaches the sea. Environmental experts are calling for a joint review of the Caspian's water balance and for long-term cooperation between all the countries that share this sea. Because the Volga flows through Russian territory and the Caspian is a shared basin, scientists say active international cooperation is essential, not only at a technical level, but through political dialogue as well. As concerns grow, international organizations have joined the Save the Caspian Sea movement. It was launched by Kazakh ecologist and legal expert Vadim Ni. We met him in Almaty before traveling to Aktau, and here is what he told us.
The current trend will continue, then we can lose almost 80% of habitats for Caspian seals, for sturgeon fish in this century. It's a very likely scenario for Kazakhstan, because we are planning the dredging works in the seaports and also on the Caspian Sea to enable more transportation of cargoes on the Caspian Sea. But also we are increasing the oil deposit exploitation on Kashagan. That will lead to the doubling, the tripling the pollution of the Caspian Sea, which is already very high.
Falling water levels threaten the entire region, but the experts warn that Kazakhstan could be affected the most. Some are already comparing the situation to the Aral Sea crisis, where years of environmental decline caused major damage to nature and human health. Many also question the effectiveness of the Tehran Convention, signed in the early 2000s. Most of its decisions have not been put into action. And just recently, President Tokayev brought up the Caspian issue again during a speech at the United Nations Regional Center in Almaty. It was another call from Kazakhstan to the global community, urging the world to help protect the largest enclosed body of water on the planet before the damage becomes irreversible. From Aktau, Kazakhstan, Fariza Kalimurzina, A News.
That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and have a good night.